Ben, and Stone. Thank you for coming to our presentation today. All right, quick word about our sponsor really quick. His name is Tim Barsness. He is the president of the company we work for, Fjorge. He graduated from NDSU with computer science, and then he hired his first employee senior year of college, and it's grown into the business that he has currently. Tim, it's been really great working with you. We really appreciate all the help you've done with us, meeting with us weekly, and then outside of the times we set aside, it's been really great, so big thank you to you. Moving on to the presentation here, there's a couple things we're going to talk about, going over what Fjorge is, talk about the problem Fjorge had, and then the solution we had. We're going to demo the solution, talk about what kind of things we thought in retrospect, and then look at the next steps. So, for those of you who don't know, Fjorge is a company that works with customized web applications, and that deals with browser applications, that deals with mobile applications, anything that works with the client's website. They work with that. They work with developing websites, but they also have maintenance plans where they can work on hosting, updating, and backups, that kind of stuff. So they work with all sites of the websites. Fjorge has grown a lot in the past year or so. They were at 23, and then they moved up to 30 employees, and it's only grown up from there. Again, they work specifically with website development, but they also do some other interesting stuff. Like one thing I found while I was searching their website was they had podcasts, and it was like weekly, bi-weekly, and those podcasts were dedicated to working with the advertising industry and talking about different trends and that kind of thing, working specifically for their clients. So I thought that was kind of cool. But with the amount of growth that they've had a lot of growth in projects and other things. So their accounting and billing workload has almost doubled, and I'll tell you why that's a problem in a second here. So some of the things that we worked with specifically was Harvest, Google Sheets, and QuickBooks. Harvest deals with their projects and all the different things they do with their project, the time spent, so they're logging information. Then there's the Google Sheets, and that's where the employees go in and say, this is what I'm going to be working on today, this is what I'm going to be working on tomorrow, these are the projects that I'm going to be putting time towards. And then QuickBooks is all their finances and that kind of thing. There's a bunch of other things that they pull data from, but at this point, that's what we worked on specifically, those three. So moving on, we're going to talk about the problem here really quick, or the opportunity, if you will. So the problem that Fjorge had was, with all that growth that they've had, there's a lot of reports that they have to create. So the amount of time that they spend on reports, there's a lot of numbers that are up in the air. So they had to have a team sit down for hours upon hours each day and create all those reports manually. Obviously that takes a lot of time. I don't know if any of you have done many reporting, but it takes a lot of time to do that kind of thing, especially for large amounts of data. And the amount of projects, it just didn't make sense for them to continue doing it manually. They did look at a third-party software called Zapier, but it didn't quite fit their needs. They needed to have a little bit less constrictions, I should say. So they wanted to move on from that manual reporting. Here to talk a little more about the solution is Stone.
All right, thank you, Zach. So I'm going to talk about the solution. So the name of the solution is called the Grand Central Database. As the name described, if you want to keep their data in like one database, it's this Grand Central Database project. And as we mentioned before, they're not only doing the manual reporting, they're also manually import data from QuickBooks and Google Sheets into their database. So that also takes a lot of time to do it. So the point of this project is to import all the data from different places into one database. And based on those imported data, we could make different specific reports that can help their company to manage their resources. And we're not the first team that worked on this project. This has been started like 2 years ago. 2 formal teams has worked on it before. And before we start to work on it, a database has already been built. And of course, there is our website interface that you can view all data from the database. And also, the former teams worked on the imports, and they also make the code of the import section more extensible. So we can keep working on it and add on to the existing imports. And here's the overview of our project. So at the beginning, our first goal or task is to create all the reports that you can see here. We're going to go into a little bit detail later in the demo, but as you can see here, all the 5 reports are the tasks at the beginning we're asked to, and after midterm we add on a little bit work to create the imports. And now let's take a look at our schedule. So this is basically the first half of the schedule. So this is what we've done before the midterm. At the beginning, we get all the software installed and the environment set up on our local device. And then we start to import the data to our local copy of the database so we can start work on it. So we did have a little bit of difficulties on it because it's an existing project. So we did have some errors. And so it takes some time, longer than we thought, to fixing those errors. And also, need to mention that again, Tim was really helpful. He had a lot of extra meetings with us during the first couple weeks. And then we get and then we start to work on the reports. So the first reports we made with the maintenance budget report. It says maintenance account status report here, and the first one, because we were not very familiar with the .NET Core Entity Framework and the link query operation, so we spent a little more time on it to learn how it works. So that's why it has more story points than the others. And after we get the first report running, and the rest came a lot faster. But at the midterm, we pretty much finished most of the reports we asked to do at the beginning, so we were ahead of our plan. So we talked to our mentor after midterm, so we make some new plans. So here's basically what the new plans we got after midterm. So the most important part is we're gonna start to create all the imports, especially the Google Sheets import and the QuickBooks import. And also we got 2 new reports. It will be based on the new imports we made. And here's the second half of our schedule. So you can see here the first reports is called the utilization billable rates reports. It's based on the new harvest import we add on to the existing harvest import. And also we start to work on the Google Sheets import and the QuickBooks imports. We're going to talk a little more about that in the demo later. And then the schedule hours reports is also based on the new Google Sheets import we made. And the last reports you can see here, there's parentheses at the end, says NC. It means not the story points are not calculated towards our progress or velocity, because to build those reports, we're going to need more data from the reports, from the imports. So they're going to need to be made after all the imports finished, and also those reports need to have more information from the Fjorge company. So those were not committed to our task. All right, now let's move on to the demo. Everyone will show the demo.
All right, so now that we kind of talked about the reports we worked on and what we've added onto the project, we're going to give you a demonstration and show you what it actually looks like and what we accomplished. So when you load up the app, you get this home page that shows the same graphic that was in an earlier slide, just kind of giving you a brief overview of what the Grand Central database is. And then you get these tabs at the top: Home, Projects, Customers, Employees. The projects, customers, employees were there when we got the project. Those are just kind of directly ways to mess with the data in those tables. But what we worked on were the reports. So if we click on that, here's the 5 reports we created. I'll talk about each of them a little bit, but we'll go a little more in depth into the first one, the maintenance budget report. So this was one of the first reports we created, and it's based on the maintenance plans that Fjorge does, as we talked about a little bit at the start of the presentation. What that is Fjorge also does monthly maintenance for different companies on their websites, whether it's backing up data or backing up the websites, hosting data, doing upgrades, etc. So they have these plans with companies that every month they have a certain amount of hours budgeted towards those projects. And this report, what it does is it takes that budget, of the hours they have every month, and it compares it towards the amount of hours they actually spent on it for that month. So by looking at that, you can see the remaining hours they have. And then the 3-month and 6-month columns are an average of the total hours spent based over those time periods. So you can tell if a project was over budget, you can see if it was just kind of a one-time thing or if it's something that happens more often. At the top here, Zach's going to click on this arrow. You can go left and right between different months to look at the report for different months, and it's just the same thing, but it's those same maintenance projects for that month. So now this is valuable to Fjorge because in the past they used to manually do this every single month, whereas we can just click a button here and get the report in a few seconds. So if we go back to the reports, now we can look at the over budget report, which is kind of similar in a sense, but it has to do more with all the other projects that aren't maintenance. So these don't have to do with a date range because they're just, once you get a project, you do it until you're done. It's not monthly or anything like that. And it's a similar kind of thing. It takes the budgeted hours and then compares it with the amount of hours they put towards it, which is the sum hours. And then you can calculate how many hours they're over budget, how much percent over they are, and then the total over is actually the money that it costed them by going over budget multiplied by the hourly rate that was set on that project. So now if we go back in the reports, we can look at the project profitability. This one deals more with projects that are already completed. It takes a little longer to load because we had to do some more work on them, it looks through more data. But it takes projects that are already done and it calculates the budgeted hours towards them multiplied by that hourly rate that we saw in the previous report and compares it directly with the amount of hours they spent on it with the average cost per hour it costs Fjorge for an employee to work on it. So by taking that, you can calculate the total profitability of those projects. If Zach scrolls down here a little bit, you'll see some rows are red, and that is because there's some projects that Fjorge has data for that doesn't have an hourly rate, and that could be from a couple different factors. For example, a project was internal, so it wasn't from a customer. It was just something Fjorge was doing internally for themselves, so it wouldn't have an hourly rate, or it was just a bug in data entry. So either way, it's something you want to flag, and because the profit is going to be messed up, and that's why we don't even display the profit on those ones. Now if we go back in the reports, we can look at the scheduled hours. Now the first three had to do with the harvest data we already had imported in when we received the project, but the scheduled hours has to do with the new Google Sheets import that Zach messed with a little bit, and you'll get to see what that sheet actually looks like in a little bit. But basically it's kind of like an Excel document, and it's where employees can go and input what they're dedicating their hours towards, what projects, and this report basically lists off all the projects, and it shows in the coming weeks how many hours are dedicated towards them. The column at the top is actually all the time not dedicated to a project yet. It's very large here because this is actually using some mock data that we received from Tim, and in a real example there wouldn't be that many hours not dedicated. It just wasn't completely filled out. The actual data will be there eventually, but the report that Zach was working on did not get completely finished. It was nearly at that point, but not completely finished yet. And the last report we worked on was the utilization billable rates report. And this one had to do with the other tables we added onto the harvest import that was given to us at the start. As you can see, there's no data here right away because it's the start of a new month. But it has the same kind of parameter as the maintenance budget, so we can go back a month and look at that. This shows all the employees Fjorge has, and it shows their hours they have spent on projects and tells you how many of those hours were billable, and that's what the utilization percent is. As you can see, some have a utilization of 0%. For example, Tim at the top, and that's because Tim's the president. He's not going to be working directly on projects that are billable and have money going towards them. He's doing more just overview of the company. Whereas you have other ones that are higher utilization because those employees were working directly on projects. But basically, those are all the reports we finished and have to show you today. And now Zach and Stone are going to each talk a little bit about the imports they worked on.
All right, so as Aaron mentioned before, I worked on the Google Sheets import. And basically, as you can see there, it's probably kind of hard to see, but it's basically, there's just a bunch of information about people, the amount of hours they worked on it, and then exactly what projects they worked on. And this is all being compiled into one database. What it's using is using the Google Sheets import, or the Google Sheets API, I should say, to take all that data and throw it in the database, basically. I got fairly familiar with the API. It took a little bit of time, but I've been working with APIs for a while, so I know kind of what I'm doing. The interesting thing, though, was that if I know it's hard to see, but on the left there, they have starting points for a bunch of different languages. So browser, Java, iPhone, iOS, that kind of thing. However, we were working in .NET Core, which is a fairly new language. So they didn't have any documentation on that. So we had to kind of research outside of the box. I had to kind of look at different things to figure out how to get through. We did get past that, or I did get past that part. Was not able to finish it completely, just due to running out of time with how much stuff I had to do. However, both me and Stone, we both took all of our data because it wasn't fully complete. We took all of our information, just threw it in documentation so they can use it later, either next capstone teams or whoever else is going to be working on that next. So if Stone wants to talk about his QuickBooks real quick.
All right, so QuickBooks Online API is pretty much an application that can help company to manage their workflow, and also in our case, it's helped the Fjorge company to manage their accounting information. As you can see here, it's just the interface of the QuickBooks Online application. And what we need to do is to connect, also just like the QuickBooks, like the Google API, QuickBooks has their own API. So what we need to do is connect QuickBooks API, their application, using OAuth to our database. So yeah, as you can see here, those are the tokens and keys we're going to need to connect the QuickBooks API to the project. So you can just use the online playground to generate all these tokens. And after you get it connected, you can see using the client, the QuickBooks.NET Core client, you can pull data for testing. I'm using like a sandbox company that Fjorge gave me that has some dummy data in there. So as you can see here, it pulled. This is the example of all the customer information that pulled from the sandbox application. So go to a little bit details. If you expand one column, you can see all the information about this specific customer or company. So using the same way, you can pull all the data you need from the QuickBooks application. And as we mentioned before, this is not complete. All the imports are not completely finished. So we're going to commit our progress towards the project and documentation, and put this documentation so the future teams can extend the existing import or keep working on it. And moving on to Ben for the review.
Well, there were some issues when we were going through this project. One of them was that I had some trouble connecting to the database for a while, but I was able to connect eventually. But originally, I mainly focused on documentation. But once I was connected, I was able to use a virtual machine and make an extra import for Harvest. Another issue we had was transferring SQL to LINQ code. It took us a while to figure out how to get that working. Also, after the midterm with the new requirements, one of the things we had to do is make new imports, and that was something that was new to us. So we had to learn how to do that. Although we did overcome all these things eventually. And for the postmortem, in retrospect, what went really well this semester was making the various reports. I mean, we got quite a few done, and it went quite smoothly. And also getting the system ready for Google Sheets and QuickBooks. Even though we don't have it fully implemented yet, we do have it ready so that it could be picked up in the future, perhaps with another team or Fjorge themselves. Also, the communication amongst the team and the sponsor went quite well. We worked pretty well together, and the team worked at a pretty steady pace as well. And though there were some things that didn't go so well, these are pretty much the things that I mentioned before. What we learned during this capstone was lots of great experience in software development. We got to see what it was like to actually make something that would be used in the real world, and also what it was like to work for a sponsor or boss. And also, as far as what we would recommend for future capstone teams, we would suggest going over the previous capstones work if there are any, so you can pick up where they left off. We also recommend setting time aside ahead of time to connect with the program that you're going to be working with. As far as the next steps in this project, one of the next things that can be done is to make more reports. I mean, especially for the QuickBooks and Google Sheets, once that is implemented, as well as additional reports that Fjorge might need in the future. Also, additional imports could be made to get data from other programs that Fjorge uses, like HubSpot, which is one that we've heard they use. And also, the current reports can be added onto with additional variables and filters and just other ways of calculating the data. And in conclusion, the capstone project has gone very well. We have a good amount of code and deliverables for Fjorge, and we hope Fjorge will benefit from what we've made just as we have benefited from working with them. Are there any questions?
One offhand, the screenshot of that QuickBooks token, that's just an example demo one and not specific to this company, right?
Yes.
It is actually the token of that sandbox company.
Okay.
So, and I forgot to mention that the sandbox company was made was an old one, so it was still using OAuth 1.0. But the QuickBooks, they already updated to OAuth 2.0, so the tokens are actually changed. I'm not sure. I think the new application you made on QuickBooks, they're not gonna generate the same tokens same as the 1.0. So if they're actually gonna implement that into like an actual app, it's gonna be needed to switch from OAuth 1.0 to 2.0.
You had some reports that were done early. Did you actually deliver those so they could start using them ahead of time? Or?
Tim's had access to our code the whole time. I guess he's kind of been working pretty closely with us on it. So if he ever wanted to, he could have used them at any time, I guess. I don't believe he's using them yet, but.
They're in a stage version now. We haven't deployed them.
Okay. I was interested to see that Tim's working 55.5 hours a day. Probably about what
Yeah.
Actually, since Tim's here, I actually have a question for Tim. Have you ever thought about turning this whole thing into a product?
Kind of. I think.
It seems like it could be.
Yeah. Right. Yep. I think there's some. Try not to take my eye off the ball right now. Just keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Anything else, or anyone else? Cool.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, guys.